Okay, I'm pretty pumped about this, Leigh. What are you up to?
Well, I was minding my business, fighting for freedom for free over here in Orange County because that's a sustainable business model. I'm joking, obviously. And I got an outreach from a local Christian university, and a friend of mine was they texted me one day, and I was actually the guy who made the video, who, by the way, is an award-winning CNN documentary filmmaker. Walked away from his career because he's a conservative Christian and didn't like all the woke crazy, and yeah, and he made recently a documentary called Epidemic of Fraud, about the suppression by Anthony Fauci of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, because of course you can't do a warp speed vaccine and get experimental approvals if you've got other viable options on the market. So they had to get rid of all the other viable options so that they could have a reason to push the vaccine so hard. And he basically did a really good job outing it in this documentary of his. You can go to Broken Truth, that's his channel, and check it out. But he texted me one day. I'm like minding my business here at my desk, and he's like, "Hey, I'm headed over to a meeting at a college in Tustin." Okay, I live in Tustin, California. I'm like, "Boy, we got no college in Tustin. Don't know what you're talking about." And he's like, "No, no, no. There's a college in Tustin." I'm like, "Okay, you must mean UC Irvine, which is in Irvine, not Tustin. They're neighboring cities." And he goes, "No, no. There's a college in Tustin. It's a little tiny Christian university." And I said, "There is." And he goes, "Yeah, they want me to teach a class, but you should come because they'd probably want you to teach a course too." Literally sitting here, Jason, with no makeup on, my hair sticking straight up like a sunflower. I just gotten out of the shower, jammies on, and he's like, "Yeah, the meeting's in like 20 minutes." I'm like, "Ah!" So, I do a hurly burly, whirly whirly, and I get in my car and, slather on some lipstick on the drive over. And I meet this adorable little Korean couple who is totally aware of the communist overthrow of our country because, hello, they've lived through totalitarian issues over in North Korea, right? And they came here and they're scared to death that they're seeing here what they left over there. And they're like, "Yeah, we'd really like you to teach a course." I'm like, "Okay, on what?" I kind of always wanted to be a college professor when I grew up, but what you thinking? And they're like, "Well, what do you see as the most need these days?" And I'm like, yeah, we need to make our college and high school youth, really everybody, but especially them, bulletproof against the neuroscience hacks that the leftists and the deep state are using to brainwash everybody, especially our youth. And what people don't understand is there's an equal and amazing body of neuroscience that we've uncovered in the last few decades that you can use to win against seemingly insurmountable odds. But nobody knows these life hacks, and they need to know these life hacks. And I would venture to say at this point, if they don't know these life hacks, you could end up in the modern day equivalent of a concentration camp for the lack of knowledge of that. And like, we need to get this data out to the masses yesterday. And they're like, "Oh, that's brilliant. We're going to call it a Psych 101 course. So it'll meet the GE, humanities requirement. And we're going to deliver it to all our little followers." They have a huge following online. I think they have like 5 kids who come in Tustin, and then like 98% of their Christian university following. It's like an online thing across the country, and they're like, "We're gonna make it available online. We're gonna make it available in person, and it'll meet this GE requirement." And we're set up to do dual high school or homeschool credit. So if the kid's like a sophomore or junior in high school and they want to check off a high school course, like an introductory psych
That's
course in high
brilliant.
school.
That's brilliant.
I know. I was like, "Where have you been my whole life? This is freaking fantastic." Like, they were just locked and cocked and ready to roll. I'm like, "Great." So off we go to the races. It's the psychology of the winner, and we are going to teach everybody. And they said, "You know what? Make it available to the moms and dads. Make it available to the senior citizens who are 100 years old and haven't died. If you don't need college credit, it's $99 to attend online. If you want the college credit, they have to do a lot of admin work on the back end. So it's a little bit higher price tag, but it's no different than what you would pay to any other college to take one course there, or for a homeschool class somewhere to teach your kids science. And as much as I like science and math and reading and writing, none of that is going to kill your kid if they don't learn it. What's going to kill your kid if they don't learn it is how to stand up against the deep state, how to recognize a bad idea, how to go, "You know what, little man with the pencil mustache? No, I don't think you're going to brainwash me and convince me it's a good idea to bake my Jewish neighbor in the oven. We're not going to do that this time around." And that is what we need to know. And there is a beautiful almost formulaic recipe for it that is based on all these really cool psychological and sociological studies, like the ones that I just went through in the trailer. And yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about for the next 4 Saturdays. So if you haven't signed up yet, go to Leigh Dundas, LeighDundas.com. Heads up, for those of you who don't know me well, my mommy gave me extra letters in my first name. So it's pronounced Lee, but it's spelled with 5 letters, LeighDundas.com. And hit the education tab and you can register today. And I would love to see you a week from Saturday, because we're gonna have a blast. And more importantly, we're gonna learn how to win the war against.
So the interesting part about this is I was looking this over because I'm definitely taking your class, but
Really?
being in the business world, Leigh, and being around masterminds, and I've gone to Grant Cardone conferences, I've gone to Vaynerchuk, I've gone to all these big online social influencers, but like people who are worth hundreds of millions of billions of dollars. And in their conferences, they teach some, not necessarily what you're teaching, but they teach this mindset. And the fascinating thing to me is never once in college of all my 12 years did I ever learn this mindset. Never once in a college course have I ever heard anybody learn this mindset. And yet the successful people in life who push through barriers all day long, or the patriots who are out in the front of this thing in 2020 and 2021, learn this stuff, or at least take courses or, some online stuff on it. But our kids aren't learning this, Leigh.
No. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jason. I mean, I got into college when I was 14. I did learn some of this. I was a music major. I wanted to be a concert pianist or a dolphin trainer. I know this is a shock to those of you who know me as a loudmouth lawyer, but I actually just wanted to teach little, killer whales how to flip around at SeaWorld or play music my whole life. But I had a poli-sci professor, a political science professor, who wandered off into the weeds one day. And yeah, this is my website page. Thanks for throwing it up there, Jason. This is where you can register at LeighDundas.com for the class. And he talked about the Stanley Milgram experiment, which you may have heard about. And I was 15 at the time. It was the late 1980s. And he was like, they did this study at Yale in the 60s. And the guy wanted to see if the Holocaust was really a one-off hiccup in our history, or if it might have had something to do with the fact that people tend to be overly obedient to bad authority if they don't know better. So he designed this study where he told people that they were going to be part of a memory experiment, and they had to memorize pairs of words. And then once you and I were paired up in this experiment at Yale, and we memorized our arbitrary pairs of words, where I said camel and you knew to say telephone, he would separate us, put us into different rooms, kind of like we're in now, but we couldn't see each other. We could only hear each other. And I would say camel, and you were supposed to know to say telephone. And when you gave me a wrong answer, I was supposed to flip a switch on the wall that would give electric shocks to you, because you'd been wired on your arms to receive shocks. And the shocks went from about 9 volts, which, if you've ever licked a battery, it's not fun, but it's also not fatal. It's not going to kill you. It started pretty mild, but then for every wrong answer, you were supposed to hit a successively higher switch that delivered a higher voltage shock. And it ended at 450 volts, which is an electric chair dose. It's a fatal dose of electricity. And at some point, the person in my shoes is hearing Jason scream bloody murder as the shocks get worse, going, "Hey man, you got to knock this shit off. You're shocking me. It's going to kill me." And it would create a lot of stress emotionally on the part of the guy who was actually being studied, and not about his memory, but for his obedience. And he would usually turn to the experimenter and go, "Hey man, I signed up for a memory experiment. This is getting kind of wild and woolly. I'm not down with hurting my neighbor. I'm going to walk out. I'm done. I'm tapping out. Sorry." And the confederate of Stanley Milgram, the pretend doctor in the white lab coat with the very stiff lapel and his Dr. So-and-so embroidered on his jacket, with his clipboard and his stethoscope, looking very authoritative, right? Very official, had been coached to say 3 little words: "You gotta continue. You must continue." No gun to the head. No, "Oh, you can't leave, man. I'm locking the door. You got to finish the experiment. I'm not letting you out until you do." Just a little verbal persuasion or coercion. You should continue. And the question was
no force at all. Just
zero
literally
force.
a programming, basically,
Yep.
command.
Yep. Just a declarative statement. You should continue. You must continue. And the question Stanley Milgram, the Yale psychologist, what he was trying to answer is, what percentage of average, law-abiding, 0 parking tickets even on their record, loving God and country, care about their kids, soccer moms and dads, auto mechanics, postal workers, accountants, lawyers, doctors, what percentage of average middle-class Americans would actually nuke their neighbor to death over a wrong answer on a memory quiz just because a guy in a position of authority said they should. And when he shopped the idea around Yale at the beginning of this, everybody all of his colleagues were like, dude, you're crazy. No, only the sadists are going to stay because they get off on that. Everybody else is going to walk the hell out of your experiment, regardless of what you tell them they have to do or not do. And when he actually did it, 2 out of 3 Americans, 65 point something percent, went all the way to the bitter end of the line and killed their neighbor. Of course, nobody was actually harmed in the experiment, but they didn't know that. Were willing to kill their neighbor over a wrong answer on a memory quiz. And this experiment was taught to me by my poli-sci professor in like 1987. And I remember to this day, I actually talk about it in my new book called Just Stand Up, My Fight for Freedom from the Brothels of Asia to the Streets of America, which you can get on my website, leighdundas.com.
Show that one more time.
It's Just Stand Up, My Fight for Freedom from the Brothels of Asia to the Streets of America. And if you go to leighdundas.com, which is spelled like you see here, leighdundas.com, there's a little book tab on my website and you can buy the book. But this professor looked around the room and we were all just whipsawed. I mean, we were speechless, to a man, to a woman, to a kid. We were like, blink, blink. And he looked at us and he said, don't you ever forget the good German who sang louder as the trains rolled by to Auschwitz and were willing to shove their Jewish neighbors into ovens, the same neighbors that they were breaking bread with 5 years earlier and babysitting each other's kids and doing business with. Those good Germans, see no evil, hear no evil. They were you and they were me. And don't you ever forget it. And I remember that day like it was yesterday. And I looked around the room and I was counting heads. I was like, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And every third person was the guy who would have stood up and said no. And 2 out of 3 were the ones who would have bowed down to bad authority. Nobody knows this experiment. Literally, Bobby Kennedy grabbed my elbow walking out of a Clay Clark event. And he goes, what did you just say? I'm like, you don't know the Stanley Milgram experiment? He goes, no, can you send it to me? And literally, I didn't send it to him quick enough. The next day I'm on a stage in Kentucky. I'd flown to the East Coast in front of 5,000 people. I'm getting ready to walk out and take the stage. And he's blowing up my phone. He's like, you're supposed to get me that study. And I'm like, dude, I've been on a plane since I saw you last. It hasn't even been a full 24 hours. And he actually quoted it when he went to Germany in front of those millions of people a couple of years ago. And he quoted it as well in a number of recent media interviews that my friends sent me. And he literally borrowed my phraseology and the way I describe it. And I don't care because he's got a bigger stage than I do. And, imitation, highest form of what, right? But we need to get the word out there. It wasn't my study. I don't know the study. We need everybody talking about the study, from Bobby Kennedy to the janitor on the corner who doesn't even have kids. Because once you know about it, you see it coming, right? You see it coming. And there's this huge body of knowledge that literally most people don't know about. But there's equally wonderful stuff. I learned a couple of weeks ago that when you feed your kid an egg a day for a year, there's something like 10 or 15 IQ points smarter by the end of the year than they were before. I learned that when you do the
good study. I like that study.
I know, right? We're all going to be forcing little eggs down our kids' throats. When you stand with your hands on your hips, looking up at the sky for 2 minutes, with your feet shoulder width apart, doing the Superman pose, it drops your cortisol levels up to 40%. I'm talking to you, women of my age, whose hormones are changing, and suddenly you're belly fat is harder to shift.
I just say adding that extra weight that they don't like around the hip area and the butt.
Even though you're exercising more and eating less, well, that's cortisol. Your hormones control, as Jason's always probably preaching to you, your hormones are what control your fat, deposits. And when your hormones change,
you know more than every doctor right now with that statement. Do you know that?
Well, guess what? I'm married to one of you. My husband's a chiropractor.
I know.
We live it, eat it, breathe it. I didn't know any of it. I knew jack all when I met my husband in the late 90s. But you marry your spouse, you learn a little bit about what they do for their bread and butter. But yeah, so it drops your cortisol by 40% by doing the Superman pose 2 minutes a day, and it ups your testosterone something like 20%, and you get uniformly better winning outcomes on the decisions you make, because your brain fatigue is lessened because you have happy hormones coursing through your body. Same thing with cold bath immersions or cold water immersions in your shower. You do 3 minutes, you increase your happy chemicals, your dopamine, your noradrenaline, all that happy stuff, something like 542%. I mean, it'll grow hair on your chest, ladies, which you probably don't want. But if you buckle up and quit doing the warm shower and stand there shivering, shaving your legs in the cold shower, man, you get out of that shower and you are ready to charge that hill. You got your Braveheart face on, and you're doing your body a favor, and you're getting more done during the day. And you need to get more done because we are at war, and your kids are the thing that hangs in the balance. But yeah, I want to teach all this crazy stuff that I've been privileged to stumble across over the last few years. Have you ever heard about the Pygmalion experiment in the classroom, Jason?
It doesn't sound the word sounds familiar, but I don't recall the actual study. What is
Let
it?
me let me know if you recognize it as I start to describe it. This was, I want to say, an early 70s when we were a kid, or late 60s experiment they did, but they basically went to teachers before the start of the year who were teaching like third graders or something, and they said, hey, we want to just give you the heads up, so you're not blindsided this year, but the right half of the class is a little bit below average. They're a little challenged, a little special needsy. They're, room temp IQ kind of folk. Good-hearted kids, but not firing on all cylinders intellectually. And the other half, they're your gifted, GATE, honors, above average performers, high IQ kids, your straight A students over there. And the teacher's like, oh, okay, thank you so much. And they're like, but don't treat them any different. Do your usual for both halves of the class, but we just wanted to let you know so that you're not mystified when it pops up like this. And the teacher was like, oh, okay, thanks. And they actually did objective measurements. I think they like mic'd her and video recorded her for the remainder of the year. And it wasn't like she was objectively doing anything any different. She was not playing the odds, playing to the audiences. It wasn't like she was going, hey, little dumb, Freddie, come on up and give it a whirl with the equation on the blackboard, see if you can do it. And when he failed, then saying, okay, smarty pants from the other half of the class, come on, little Einstein, show us how it's done. She was not doing any of that BS. She was behaving ostensibly exactly the same. And yet, by the end of the year, the two halves of the class that were denominated smart and dumb were performing to their label, simply because of the expectation they had set in the teacher's head, which had never even been broadcasted to the students. The above grade average was suddenly above grade average, and the below grade average were below grade average, even though they were just arbitrarily mixed in like they are in any normal class. Such is the power of expectation. The rat study that I talked about in the trailer you just played is similar. I mean, what the hey, right? You got a rat who on average is dying at minute 14. And the research guy, Carl Richter, the experimenter who discovered this, he had a bunch of rats in his lab that he was using for something else. And he on a lark one day, decided to take his fat, sassy, bonbon eating, sitting back on their little rat couches every day, lab rats, and throw them in the soup to see how long they would last before they drowned. And it turned out they averaged about 15 minutes. And he was kind of shocked. He thought they would swim longer than that because we grew up hearing that rats jumped the ship when Columbus was coming over, when ships were going down, and they would swim through the ocean to shore. And he's like, how do you make shore from 2 miles out if you're a rat and you're giving up at minute 14 and a half? Like, what the hell? So he's like, well, maybe it's because my lab rats are lab rats and they're fat and they're lazy. Like, let me go find some wild rats. And so after he used his lab rats, he went and he set traps and caught a bunch of wild rats that were the descendants of the Christopher Columbus rats that should be able to swim for miles. And he threw them into the battle water, and they performed less well than the fat, sassy lab rats did, Jason.
Really?
And yes, this is how he ended up devising the final experiment that I actually quoted in that video just now. So then he's like going, what the hell? Like, my hypothesis is blown to heck. Like, how is this even possible that the wild rats are giving up the ghost quicker than the lab rats? Like, when they're in better shape, it doesn't make any sense. So he cogitated on it for a few days. And then he was like, maybe it's because my lab rats get fed 2 square meals a day by my research assistant. And they know there's this thing called a human being who helps them out because they're stuck in a lab and they see this human every day. And so they've got a hope of rescue. And maybe it's the hope of rescue from the human that they see every day that feeds them and cleans their cage that is giving them the will to outswim and swim an extra minute or two longer than the wild rats. So that's when he put the pedal to the metal and dropped it into gear. And he's like, let me put this to the test. So he dunked his lab rats again. Once again, they gave up the ghost at minute 15. But right before they were about to die, that's when he picked them out of the water and he, pet their little heads. And he's like, you're a good rat. You got this. You're good enough. You're strong enough. And gosh darn it, people like you. And all the SNL skits and the Sally Field Oscar acceptance speeches, like all the woo woo. Oh, say your mantra to yourself and things change in your life, which actually works, by the way. And then, after a whopping minute, it wasn't like he gave him a big old R&R break. He dumped him back in. Theoretically, they should have swum less far because they had just gone to full muscle fatigue. I mean, we're running a marathon and you're getting a minute break and you're being asked to do a back-to-back marathon without sufficient time to regenerate your muscle, whatever, your glycogen stores. And yet not only did those rats continue to swim for another 15 minutes, I mean, hello, he had to keep his researchers awake. They swam for 3 damn days straight. 15 minutes that should have been less that went to 3 days on the simple power of the reinforced notion that hope and help and possible rescue might be available because it had just been reinforced in the rat's brain by virtue of the first rescue.
That makes a really good argument for soul, consciousness, all the above, and a person latching onto that hope and knowing that there's something deeper. Even unconsciously, there's something deeper in them that can keep going.
Absolutely. My grandpa did. Have you ever heard the story about my grandfather?
I don't think I heard that one.
Okay, so sometimes I end my Clay Clark speeches with it, but apparently he wasn't the nicest guy.
Leigh and I have spent a lot of time together, but I don't think I've heard that one.
We spent a lot of time in the green room before our speeches, but then we're always running around signing autographs and giving away merch and books to people during other people's speeches. So people are like, "Oh, did you hear Scott McKay? Did you hear General Flynn?" And I'm like, I was standing in the building, but no, I rarely hear other people's speeches. So you guys, the viewers may have heard the speech, but poor Jason, I'm gonna clue him in. So my father's dad was U.S. Navy, and he was actually standing on the deck of the USS West Virginia when it was bombed out from under him on December 7th of 41. And they came out. He was actually, going to the bathroom or in some interior compartment of the battleship. And when he opened the door, he was quoted in a newspaper, a very graphic guy. He's like, yeah, I saw a head rolling around looking for its body. I read that article in like my family, photo album when I was like an 8-year-old. And I'm like, ooh, Mom, does that mean the head had been decapitated from the body? And she's like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have let you read that paragraph, but yeah, that's what it means, babe. And I'm like, oh, okay. And literally they were so unprepared for the Japanese attack that they were out of ammo, out of artillery, out of everything, out of handgun bullets. I mean, they had maxed out and they were depleted to the nth degree within about a half hour. And at that point, my grandfather and his colleagues on the ship started ordering their men to pick up potatoes that they were supposed to use for that night's dinner and lob them up at the sky, because that is how low the Japanese sun on the belly of those fighter planes were coming down as they were.
Oh my God.
Yeah. They were like, a guy with a good arm who played some high school baseball was able to like maybe actually hit the plane with the potato. Not that the potato was going to do jack squat against the belly of a plane that was dropping bombs on them, but they understood the old adage that any plan right now, even if it's not a perfect plan, a good plan today is better than no plan, right? Or the perfect plan tomorrow. So they were keeping the guys active, but the ship is sinking. And eventually they threw a line to another ship nearby that had not been sunk yet. And the guys were hand over handing their way, rappelling kind of over to the other ship. And then that one got bombed. And my grandfather ended up in the water, which was on fire, because all of the ships going down were releasing all the oil from their storage tanks. And it was sitting, oil and water, right? It was sitting pooled up on the top of Pearl Harbor Bay, whatever. And with the live fire rounds that were hitting, it was setting the shit on fire. So these men that didn't die were actually swimming through water that was on fire. I mean, like running out of a burning building, but worse, because you can't swim as fast as you can run. And My grandfather survived that and got back to shore, was put in the hospital for a week or two due to his burns. And then they sent him right back out to the South Pacific, where they put him on another ship because he was Navy, right? And they bombed that ship out from under him, a couple miles off the shore of Australia. So he swam miles. And these guys are, they're Navy, so they can swim, but they're not like Olympic athletes. They're not used to swimming like 7 miles or whatever through great white shark territory.
Yeah, that's dangerous waters.
Yeah, and they're not swimming into like Newport Beach with some nice 2-foot rollers. They're swimming through rocky coral that's, 20-foot waves against the like cliffs of Ireland shit half the time, right? So he makes it to shore, makes it through that. They put him on a third ship. This guy had literally 9 lives. Third ship, and they redeploy him again into the South Pacific Theater. Again, his ship is bombed. He and 4 of his mates managed to get into a life raft, and this is the 40s. So they're not equipped with all the stuff they're equipped with now, like flares and lights and food rations. Like they end up, the only thing these guys end up bringing, bless their souls, they're young men, is a half bottle of Australian rum. No water, no canteens, just a freaking bottle of rum. Yeah, that's half drunk. And there they are, bobbing around in the South Pacific Seas with their half bottle of rum, which they survived on, which tells me it must have been pretty good rum, for the better part of a week. And then they were rescued he was rescued a third time. Lung cancer got him at age 42 back on terra firma stateside.
Oh my God.
These are the men that fought for our country and in many cases died for our country. And if you don't believe you owe it to yourself, damn right you owe it to your kid. And if you don't owe it to your kid, for frickin' sake, like look at the men and women who came before you, Washington crossing the Delaware, beating off the largest army and navy in the world with a ragtag group of colonial supporters that had no business winning the fight against the superpower that was England at that time. And yet they did, and gave us this great country we are now in. We owe it to the men and women who came before us. We are the rightful heirs to freedom. It is hardwired into our DNA, and we need to fight this fight. But you need to understand that the fight starts up here. Nobody wins, nobody charges the hill with their Eeyore face on. Ho hum, nothing goes right.
It's only taken us 1 to 2 generations to fall from these strong men and women to where we are now. And when 2020 hit, I remember your videos going viral when you were in front of, I think, the Orange County Commission or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And it's crazy, Leigh, because everyone was like, oh my gosh, look how strong she is. Well, you came from those men and women, as I did, fighting for this. But we've fallen so far, Leigh.
We have. But courage is contagious. And one of the reasons I speak on Clay Clark's stage, by the way, everybody thinks all the lawyers are rich, and maybe the guys who are actually filing lawsuits are. I am not filing lawsuits. I live in a blue state. We are running a 99% loss rate when you try to make a new law at the legislature or apply a good law to good facts on a case that should win, because the blue state judges are bought and corrupted and blackmailed and scared. So I'm not going to waste my time doing stuff that doesn't win. I'm doing convoys and weird stuff like that because it wins, but nobody pays you to name and shame your health officer into quitting and taking her mask mandate with her. Nobody pays me to make a TV ad with a Holocaust survivor going, hey, this vaccine passport is a bad plan. That's how Hitler started hunting my people down. And I know that because I grew up in a concentration camp and survived. And that's how we got rid of the vaccine passport. But nobody pays me to grace Clay Clark's stage. But the reason I do this work, even though I'm damn near bankrupt after 49 months of no paycheck, along with my husband, who, like any drowning person, I grabbed onto and took under the wave with me, financially speaking, is because I knew that we were in the battle of our lives. And I knew if we didn't win it, that our kids were going to die in the modern day equivalent of a Warsaw Ghetto or a concentration camp. And so I don't begrudge what I've done, but the very first Clay Clark speech I ever gave when we were at Rhema Bible College in Oklahoma of 2021, May, whenever that was, I gave my little spiel. I talked about fighting down the board of supervisors, getting my health officer fired, getting rid of the vaccine passport. And I got off my stage after 15, 18 minutes, and the whole audience erupted. I mean, I knew I was an okay speaker. Like, I'm a lawyer. We get paid to speak, right? Or at least I used to.
You're better than okay, just for the record.
Yeah, people think I'm a genius. I'm like, you haven't seen me try to cook a meal or prep my own taxes. I am like a 3-toed sloth on a Thorazine shot. Like, I'm like, 2 and 2 is how much? 5? People are like, oh my God, Leigh, let me do the taxes for you. Like, I'll volunteer to help you with that. I'm like, please, God. So I stay in my lane. I can speak, but I discovered that this is why I'm here right now for such a time as this. God put me here to speak and change hearts and minds. And apparently that's my one gift. So stay in my lane, I do. But I had this soccer mom come up to me and take a picture with me at the end of it. And her camera had died. So she's like, hey, can you take the picture with your phone and send it to me? And I forgot to send it from my Google voiceover number, which is what I usually give people I don't know that well. I sent it directly from my cell phone number. Luckily, she was not a crazy stalker or weirdo. And she texted me I think it was the next afternoon, like Monday afternoon. And she's like, hey, I just wanted to let you know that based on the story you told about standing up and the sex slave who stood up to her captors, which I can tell that story in a minute if you haven't heard it, Jason, and what you did in Orange County, I'm a grandma. I don't even have kids in the schools, but I have grandkids. And I was washing my hair and I felt like God tapped me on the shoulder and was like, get out of the shower now. Don't even blow dry your hair. Don't put your makeup on. You're going to the school board meeting. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened next? And she's like, I went to the school board meeting and I took the mic, and I've never spoken publicly for anything ever. My knees were shaking, my voice was quaking, but I did it because I remember you saying, even those who look good on stage get nervous before we take the microphone. The trick is you do it anyway. You do it despite your fear, not because you have no fear, right? And so she's like, so I channeled Leigh Dundas and I walked out there and I said to the school board, you need to stop this mask mandate. And they looked at me and they were like, okay, we'll do it in a month. And I'm like, wow, they just said that based on the power of your one sentence. And she goes, yeah. And I don't know what came over me, because then I said, no, you're going to do it right damn now. And I'm like, you did? Okay, what happened next? And she goes, they said, okay. And they got rid of the mask mandate and they put our kids back on campus. Thank you. And I'm
the power of a voice with intention.
Power of one voice. That is a woman who is not a lawyer. She was a pissed off grandma in flyover country. I don't know, Iowa, Nebraska, somewhere. Never spoken publicly before. Didn't even have a kid in the district at that point. And she went and she faked it till she made it. And she told them, it doesn't matter if you're eloquent. It matters if you're certain and you're passionate and they know you're not messing. And when they feel that you're coming for them, they get all kinds of scared and they drop the bad plan, or they drop the bad whatever it is, and they run away like cockroaches headed for a bad corner of a cheap motel. Like, that is how you get it done. You name and shame them, and the only thing they care about is getting reelected. They don't want bad press. They don't want to fight an army of pissed off parents standing on their sidewalk because they cut your mic at the board meeting and you got their home address and you showed up and used your First Amendment right with your bullhorn from Walmart and your little homemade Kinko's sign. They don't want their kid not able to rollerblade down the sidewalk. They don't want their wives saying, why can't I get the car out of the garage to go to Costco without 30 angry Red Sea protesters that I'm having to part the Red Sea on? Like, what are you doing at the board meeting that's pissing our neighbors off, honey? Like, when they are having to have little kids crying because they are being held hostage inside their house because you can't let your kid rollerblade in front of the angry protesters, that is what gets her done. And yeah, it's not nice. And it's not what my mommy taught me to do. And it's not what law school taught me to do. But you know what? I don't freaking care. They're coming for your kid. They want to play it nice. I'll battle it out in court. They're gonna be biased in court. They're gonna be biased at the board meeting. I'm coming for where you work and live, and I will use my First Amendment right in every lawful way to get rid of you or minimally name and shame you into dropping that bad plan. And we have done that. And when I realized that it was a recipe that I could give permission to other pissed off moms and dads and grandmas to do, and that they could do it, because this war is not going to be won with me and Jason Dean all out here with our Braveheart faces on. We need an army. But when you have the army, nobody wins against the power of a people. It is an undefeated historical truth that when enough people stand up together to fight down the tyranny, they're done. There's more of us than them. 80% or more of the people on this planet are good-hearted. They're just asleep at the wheel and they don't know what's going on. But when they become aware, when they know more, they make better decisions. And when they go to bat for their kids, they can actually get the Hitlers of our era to walk it back and to run away. And that's what we need.
100% amen. And you're right. None of us go on stage going, "Oh, we're excited," but You want the message to come across. We've been saying the same thing on the show to everybody out there. I can fly around the country. You can fly around the country. We can have all these people who are, influencers. But at the end of the day, I can't be at every school board. You can't be at every school board. We can't be at every protest. The people need to go in and feel nervous, feel scared, feel terrified. And then that adrenaline kicks in and you feel like you're Superman and Superwoman because you did something and it was effective. And even though it wasn't effective, you got a little piece of that. You got a little of that drug in you of you were impactful. And there's nothing more important than that.
Yeah, that is exactly right. And the first time I saw the Power of the People move, because again, they don't teach lawyers at Yale Law School. I got into Yale Law at 17. I didn't think I would be running a convoy at age 50 as my crowning legal achievement, or screaming my board of supervisors or board of education into the right lane. But I didn't tell this story yet today, did I? Because I've been on a couple podcasts about how I was in Thailand during their coup d'etat.
No, I want to hear that story. I want to hear your trafficking story because
Cool.
And I'm going to take myself off camera because it's so hard to listen to. I'll be over here with tissues all over the place.
Okay, so I started doing the human trafficking work in 2013. I was hired to be general counsel to an anti-slavery nonprofit. For those of you who are not aware about how bad and big a problem human trafficking is, it is 150 billion with a B dollar a year industry. 40 million with an M people are currently enslaved. 90% are female, and 89% have sexual servitude, meaning some sort of sexual act being the exchange medium. So they might be locked up sewing your Nike gear in a factory somewhere, but they're also expected to trade sexual favors to their bosses or other people during their evenings. So even if they're not full-on sex slaves or labor trafficked, it often involves sexual servitude of some sort. So when you look at that, and a lot of it is underage. So when you look at it, you're like, dang, most of the trafficked victims are women, and they're not even women, they're girls, and they're not even girls, they're kids. And 40 million, to give the audience a frame of reference, that is every single person in California, my state where I'm broadcasting from this morning, waking up chained to a bed, being raped 10 times a night for profit. We have almost 40 million people in the state. So that is how bad the trafficking problem is. And it is supposed to take over drugs for the top spot inside of the next decade, for the simple reason that there's a hell of a lot more profit in selling a kid to a sex buyer than there is into selling cocaine. And I'll give your audience the calculus on that right now. If Jason's a cokehead and I'm selling coke, by the way, this is a hypothetical, LA Times, if you're listening, I am not a drug dealer and he is not a drug addict. This is you gotta say that, because otherwise
we are not involved in any drugs in any way, shape, or form.
No, we are not involved in weapons or money laundering or drug trafficking or human trafficking. I'm just giving an example to make it real, right? But it's fictional, okay? So I underscore it's fictional. But if I'm selling drugs and somebody like Jason comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, I want some coke." I'm like, "All right, 100 bags. Here's your baggie of coke." And he likes it, and he comes back tomorrow night and he goes, "Yeah, that was some good blow you gave me. I want to buy more." In the intervening 24 hours, I need to have portioned off, I don't know what the going rate is, 30, 40, 50% of the $100 bill he gave me last night. And I need to go to my supplier and get more coke. I need to buy more drug in order to sell more drug to the guy the next day, which is a long way of saying, if you're in business, that your net profit's not the same as your gross. I grossed $100, but my profit was the $50 that I didn't have to spend on my overhead resupplying my store of cocaine or whatever I'm selling, right? And it's your profit margin. You're running whatever in that hypothetical 50, 70% profit margin. In contrast, if I sell a girl to a pedophile and that guy goes, "That was good stuff," and he comes back the next night and he goes, "I want to do it again," I don't need to have gone and bought more girl last night to sell him more girl tonight. I just rent her over and over and over again until she dies, which, according to the FBI study from 2 decades ago in America, on average, it takes about 7 years from the time a kid is first trafficked until they are dead or dying. Average age for trafficked, if you're a girl in America, 12. If you're a boy, it's a little younger. It's about age 11 sometimes. I can't do math, but I'll do the 12 and 7. These kids are 19 by the time they're dying of AIDS, death by pimp. They're strangling him out during the sex act because they get off on it, or death by John, or death by pimp because he keeps his girl in line and he beats her too much and she hemorrhages into her brain and she strokes out. these kids are dead or dying before they can legally freaking vote or sign, a real estate contract, right? And the situation's worse in Asia because they're trafficked at younger ages. So that is what you're looking at. And I agreed to sign on as general counsel to an anti-sex slavery nonprofit. And I moved to Southeast Asia and I started doing brothel work in a town that had 140 child brothels on it on the Thailand-Malaysia border. And I have her face blurred, but it almost looks unblurred right now. But that girl is one of the girls who was caught in the brothel town with me. And these girls are trafficked in a different way than you see portrayed by Hollywood. In America, it's guerrilla pimping, which is they kidnap the girl into a white panel van, and it's every parent's worst fear. That's very infrequent, but that's what Hollywood makes famous. More often than not, they're recruited by recruiters in their high school, men who pretend to be their boyfriend and then turn them out. Or, they're foster youth, they're runaways, they hit the street. They have about 48 hours on average before a sex trafficker figures out that they're underage and turns them out, right? So that's the setup in first world countries. In Asia, 90% of the girls we pull out of the Thailand brothels come from Laos. What is Laos? It is a currently communist country. When we took a documentary film crew in to interview the girl you just saw's friend, we asked her, did you know when you got to the brothel what you would be doing? And she said, yeah, but I'm not unhappy to be here. And my London colleague who was helping with the filming leans over and he goes, Leigh, there must be something wrong with the Thailand translator because nobody's happy to be in a brothel. Like, ask it again. So we ask it again. Did you know what you'd be doing when you got here? And she goes, yeah, I knew exactly what I would be doing, but I am not unhappy because my 7 brothers and sisters have food on the table and they're not starving to death. And that's when I realized, that I had a first world privilege and a bias that I didn't even know I had, which is if you and I had talked before today, Jason, and before I'd had that aha moment 10 years ago, we would have both agreed, along with every person watching us right now, that it's wrong to sell your kid to a brothel. But is it any more or less wrong to fail to sell your kid to a brothel and watch all 7 of your kids starve today, including yourself? Is that a better, higher, good end? What you need to do is ask yourself, how in the hell do you get so poor that your only damn good option on the table is selling your child to save the others? And that is communism. 90% of the girls in Thailand brothels come out of Laos. It's a currently communist country. The rest come from Cambodia, and they had a communist takeover when you and I were kids, right? Where a quarter or more of their population was genocided. So that was the first thing I learned when I was there. The second thing that was really exciting is we were working on the Malaysia border in radical jihadi territory, and the brothels sit across the river from the terror training cells that teach the USS Cole bombers and the 9/11 bombers how to do their tricks. And so what happens every day is they practice their bombing skills by bombing the brothels. So the first year I worked there, we had 330 bombs go off, and that's what the town looks like right after it gets bombed. That was a bomb a day. So when people are like, why is Leigh not really easily scared? When we threatened to go sit on her sidewalk in front of her house and do what she did to the board of supervisors, I'm like, because unless you got a bunch of bombs strapped to your torso, yeah, you're not really registering on my radar, because this is where I lived and worked for 10 years. On the other side, you see what the hotel looked like when I walked out of my hotel, what the streets of Thailand looked like in February 2014. They were having a coup d'etat. The military was in the streets. The streets were on fire, and the people were in the streets. And in the middle here, you can kind of see that there's a bunch of green-hatted soldiers. And those are the military that are fighting against the coup. And the people around them have the military surrounded. They have a coup every 5 to 6 years because they have lost the ability to honestly elect those who would lead them. Note to self for your listeners, we cannot go any further down this election integrity fiasco chute than we already have. Because once you get too far gone, your only recourse is that. Okay. And our founding fathers wanted better for us than that. That is why we have 3 separate but equal branches of government. We have the ability to do away with government. It's in our Constitution if it's no longer serving us. Okay. But if it is mission critical and the most important thing you can do to make sure that you don't end up living in an actual third world banana republic, because otherwise your only recourse is violent revolution, and you don't want that.
Is that similar to what happened in Myanmar or no?
Probably. I'm not up to speed on the neighboring country of Myanmar, but all these little Southeast Asian countries are just constantly having coup d'etats, along with a lot of Africa and various other hotspots in the world, because of this. The people are being led by Nazis, by Hitlers, by Stalin, by fascists or communists, and they're not happy and they rumble in the street. So it was 2 steps forward, 2 steps backward. Nobody was winning. And then finally, the farmers were like, you know what? We've had enough. And they got on their farm equipment, their big earth moving caterpillars, their tractors, their backhoes, and they went 10 miles an hour across the Thai countryside. And it took them a day or two to get to the capital of Bangkok. But when they got there, they encircled the international airport and they brought that country to its knees on a dime. And I remember looking up at God and going, I thought I was here to fight the brothel industry, but this is kind of an interesting thing. I need to remember this play because convoys work. And then I laughed and I'm like, the F am I thinking? I'm a soccer mom of an 8-year-old in a first world country and a lawyer. When the hell am I ever going to?
You ended up in convoys.
Yeah. After laughing at myself like you are right now, I go, I'm never going to need to do a convoy. Well, fast forward to February of 22, and that is exactly what I did. You thought those truckers did that convoy themselves? No, they did not. I got them a retired naval commander to run point who had been asked by the Pentagon to do every convoy we ever did in the Mideast to keep our bases safe. He ran point. I got him Navy SEALs to make sure we weren't false flagged with a fertilizer bomb in the back end of a semi. I got them 24/7 press. I got them the Atalanto Stadium. I got them every venue that they stopped at between here and Indianapolis to rest their heads. I got them all the funding that they started with. Yeah, the truckers went, but they needed a lot of help to go.
I don't think any of the publicly knows that you were the person that did that.
Yeah, I was the person who did that. And I knew to do that because I had taken notes when I was in Thailand. God had me in Thailand for a reason. Now I'm going to give a 2-minute quickie of the girl that was my assistant in Thailand. They hired a secretary for me, a Thailand girl who was 17, 18 years old. And they said, yeah, she's going to be your secretary in your Bangkok business office when you're doing admin work here. But we're going to run her on Intel. And I'm like, what? They said she's going to be an Intel asset. And my brain was leaking out my ear, Jason, because I'm like, no, like the Intel guys are ex-Navy SEALs and they're 300 pounds and all muscle and they're like 6'8". And my Thailand secretaries are like 92 pounds and 4'11". And what do you mean this is the same person in the same body? Like, what? My brain was just like, what? And the guy who arranged for this goes, I'm going to let her tell you her story herself in her time. And I'm like, okay, whatever. So my secretary starts working for me. We'll call her Jenny. And she walks in about a weekend and she goes, hey, I got your laptop to talk to your printer. And I'm like, oh, praise God. Because if you know lawyers, we're nothing without our ability to kill a tree and print some paper. And then she doesn't leave. She sits down across from me and she starts to look really quiet. And she goes, so I am what happens when Australian men come to our country and marry Thai women. That's why I speak fluent in both languages. My dad was a mean Australian drunk. When he would get drunk, he would beat the, you know what, out of me and my mom. I was 11 or 12 years old. He was beating up my mom. I left my Quonset hut of a hut in rural Thailand. I walked down the street, the dirt road, sat on a bus bench to clear my head when a truck full of Thai young men came up. 3 or 4 of the men jumped out of the bed of the truck, wrestled me to the ground, shoved the needle in my arm. There was a narcotic agent in it of some sort. I was out cold. And when I woke up, I was on the Myanmar now, Thai-Burma border in a slave trading camp where men who own brothels from the world over would come to buy their girls, to go home with their girls to stock their brothels. So they would come buy product. And we were full of girls, age toddler, baby on up to about my age, because no pedophile wants a kid who's much past 12, 13 years old. And unlike cocaine dealers who would never flush their product down the toilet, there's girls aplenty here in Southeast Asia for the kidnapping. So when the guards would get bored every few weeks, they'd line us up and they would shoot us and kill us for sport. And one day they had lined us up in a firing line and they were going down this line and laying guns on temples and killing the girls in front of me. And every time they got to a new girl, she would drop to her knees and grapple for the gun with the guard and beg and plead for her life to no avail because she would die anyway. And she was pissed when she told me that. She was clearly looking at these girls in her mind's eye, and she was pissed at the fact that they had groveled for their life. And then she stopped talking. And I said, what did you do when the guards got to you? And she said, I stood up And I reached out my hand and you said, you give me that gun, I will shoot myself, but I am not living like this anymore. I will kill myself. And the owner of the camp overheard me and he said, you out of line, follow me. And he sat her down in his office and he said, I have been doing this for decades. And everyone but everyone will beg for their life in the final analysis, but you didn't. And I want to know why. And she looked at him and she said it a second time. She goes, I know you have a gun back there in your desk somewhere. You give it to me and I will blow my own brains out, but I'm not living another day like this. And legend has it, he leaned back in his chair, leaned back and forth a couple times, looked at her and he goes, you know what? Get out of here. You're free to go. And I learned that day a lesson from a 17-year-old former sex slave that I have never forgotten, which is this. When you are looking at a locked and loaded, double barrel, fully loaded gun that is full, whether it's figurative or literal, that is looking to do you in, that is full of hate and anger and tyranny and injustice, you stand up. You stand up because you are better off fighting for your life on your damn feet than ever taking a knee to tyranny. You don't ever vanquish tyranny by bowing down to it. And so when these people said I had to take the shot because XYZ, or I had to use pronouns because I have a Fortune 500 job and they made me do it. No, nobody made you do shit. Pardon my French. You always have a choice, even if that choice is simply how you die. And I didn't know that until a 17-year-old sex slave told me that. But I have remembered that lesson since she taught it to me. And it is one of the reasons I thought if she can stand up to tyranny when it's actually ready to kill her, like actually kill her, not just do her out of a job, then certainly I can go in front of my board and supervisors and call them on the carpet. And you know what? You can too. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. You need to stand up. Margaret Mead said, nobody wins against the power of people. What she said is, never doubt a small group of people can change the world, for indeed, we're the only group that ever has. You have the power to change this war we are in and indeed to win it. That's why I want you to register for my class, LeighDundas.com. Go to the education tab, sign up today. But we got to do better. And I know we can win this war if we just go to where we can learn the tips and tricks that are going to tip the scale in our favor. And we're already doing it. We just need to do more of it. I know I'm over time, Jason, and I'm late to my next podcast, but thank you so much for having me on your show today. And let's do this again because I had a blast talking to you.
I would text, and when I'm in my regular studio, we'll do it all over again, and we'll have a blast. And go to your next podcast. Love you. I'll text you, we'll get everything set up, okay?
Brilliant. Thanks again for having me, and thanks to all your viewers who listened to me babble for an hour.
No, you didn't babble. You're phenomenal. Go. Have a great day, okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Take care. Bye, guys.
Leigh Dundas, everybody. I'm going to run because the music is getting louder. I hope you enjoyed that. Obviously, a lot to digest. And she'll be back. We've been talking a lot behind the scenes. I'm going to do her podcast. She'll be back on, and you'll be able to ask her questions when she comes back, and we'll go through so much more. And I've heard those stories before, and they still punch you in the stomach. It is time to fight. It is time to continue to stand up and keep moving forward. We are here, as I always say, to reverse metabolic enslavement, but literally we're here to reverse enslavement, reverse the enslavement that's happening. And the only way that happens is not, like she said, not for me and her and a few other influencers and people who, look like they're running all over the place. It's for you at home to stand up. And stories she tells with people who go to the school boards who don't even have kids in the school. It's your job to stand up. We are rebuilding a brand new civilization, everybody. I want you happy Thursday. Love, serve, and help. I'm Dr. Jason Dean. This is BraveTV. Thank you to Leigh Dundas. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.